Thank you all for being here, and Adam, it's a great pleasure for me to continue the discussion of Mount Chicago. This is a book that I told you this, but it's a book I really enjoyed, and it moved me deeply. So I wanted to start by asking about the disaster with which the novel opens, which feels more like a premise to the book than something that happens. The ground opens up. It's a sinkhole. It's a crater. It takes in the Chicago, the Art Institute, Millennium Park, and everyone that your main character Gladman loves. And there's this adage in writing fiction, that to have a story, something has to go wrong, something bad has to happen, and something goes so wrong in this. And I wondered how and when in the writing process did the disaster occur to you? And maybe also more interestingly, what did writing the disaster enable you to do as far as the rest of the book and the rest of the story?
First of all, thank you for those kind words, and also to Emily and for y'all for coming, and to the American Library for having me. Well, so I think that it came to me pretty quick, actually. I wrote, the book has this sort of like formal-ish introduction, and while I was writing that, I was thinking about, I was starting to think about what the book actually would be. And because I thought writing an introduction before you've written the thing that it introduces, I don't know. And I guess that what it enables, it sets really everything in motion. This disaster happens, and it allows me to have a character, comedian who doesn't have any real people that are close to him that are around anymore. So this part of this is about preventing me from doing things I've done historically as a novelist. I want to sort of make a constraint for myself, like instead of having this whole system of human beings around and describing the system, I want to write about this individual and a few other individuals. Part of it is there's, I think that at the time I was writing it, I was realizing how many people around me, like that were my age, that I was close with, had lost people, and how I really hadn't. And that was a strange thing to think about as a, just as a human, but also, as the novelist human, to be like, I really, and I write some pretty violent things at times. People die, dogs die, lots of things die, and really no one close to me has ever died, which, that's Formica, so I won't knock on it. But like, so I thought this is a thing you should really think through, because you're gonna get knocked out. This is gonna hit you, and it's gonna really mess you up at some point. So you should maybe think it through. As lucky as it felt to not have lost anybody, I was like, most people have like learned how to weather this to some degree, or so it seems, well before they're my age. And so this was, I think, I kind of was thinking about that, and this disaster takes the main character's entire family, like really anyone he's ever cared for. So it set that in motion. It allowed me to think about that. I have a reason to think about that. And it was also the image of Chicago, of downtown, just being sucked into this hole, was appealing for some reason. Even though I love Chicago and I love the skyline, I love the Loop, it was pretty startling to imagine, I guess. And
I have, this is just sort of my curiosity, because you wrote this before the date at which the disaster happened, which was what, 17th November 2021.
11/17, yeah.
Did you have a kind of frisson on that day? Did you? How was it? What was it like to live that day in real time?
It was weird. I have a friend. 11/17 ends up appearing in a lot of my books, and for no reason other than I really like the sound of 11/17. I liked it in the first book, and I continue to like it. I have a friend who's a reader of mine, who anytime anything comes up 11/17, he sends me a photo of it, and like it's the clock, like whatever, a bill comes in and it's 111.7. It's like, So it's like that kind of thing. I think that's the only thing that has anything to do with 1117. Apart from, I guess also there was a thing where early on, like the characters in the book are Jewish largely, and I think I controlled for that not being a date that has any significance in the religion.
Okay.
Like because there's a lot of those dates, and I think that's why I originally did in the first novel, and I trusted it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Good. You mentioned the introduction of the book, which is
Yes.
which is really an interesting way to start the book. A character announces himself as Adam Levin, tells us that he's the author of the book, and basically cautions us to say, okay, well, what you're about to read is a work of fiction. The characters are, in fact, characters I've made up, and there's a line that stuck with me. I sort of wrote it down so I don't paraphrase you, but he tells us, I fear, so he's kind of telling us that it's a book of fiction, telling us that what we're going to read is lies, and he says, I fear the lies this novel comprises would thrill you less if I weren't to include this introduction. And I'm friendly to metafiction. I like the reminder that, hey, we're reading a book. It's like, okay, I'm dreaming, I'm going to dream on. But I'm interested, because this seems to be a feature of your work that recurs, and I'm wondering, what is it about this reminder that we're reading fiction that is thrilling to you? What seems important about it to you?
I mean, I wish I could articulate it better than that. I think it's a gut thing that has to do with what I love when I'm reading fiction, and it is that when the artifice is so overwhelmingly artificial and I'm still moved by it, that's what I want. That's kind of what I want from everything aesthetic in a way. Like, and it's not to say that I don't like things that don't do that at all, but those are the biggest thrills to me. It's like it's almost there's a danger of making it sound like it's like some kind of stunt that one is trying to pull off, but that's not it. It's really like that. That's what I'm like. Why am I moved by? Of course, I'm not going to think of any example, but to be taken by surprise, to be surprisingly moved when you're thinking I'm playing pretend, I'm playing along with something, and nonetheless it shakes you up a little bit. That I think that's the trick. And I guess the example, like, because it's not, I can't think of anything, so I can only think of like fictional examples, but it's like just like any number of Donald Barthelme stories, right? Like The Balloon or The School specifically are the first that come to mind. Or George Saunders stories. Some George Saunders stories are they adhere pretty close to reality. But like The Balloon, the first time I read it, I certainly didn't understand what Bartholomew was trying to do. I'm not sure I fully do now. But The Balloon, like every time I read it, you get to the end, there's this like weird confessional break-in by the narrator about how maybe this giant balloon over New York City that he's been describing for the entire story is just I think it's a spontaneous autobiographical disclosure that stems from sexual longing for a woman that he's been writing the story to or something, and it's just like and it's like there's this like shock, there's this feeling, because the whole story you're working through metaphors, working through this primary metaphor of this balloon, like why is this balloon being described, why is it there, and you think you're thinking about the balloon, but you're thinking about the story, and you're thinking about metaphors, not just the metaphor, and you kind of get to the end and you're like, maybe this really is a spontaneous autobiographical disclosure by Bartholomew. I don't know if this is a narrator or this is the author talking to me. And there's something that just becomes like sort of 4D or something. And I always love that. So not that it happens all the time, but that's the feeling that I'm seeking when I'm reading, and so it's the feeling I'm seeking to allow a reader to have when I'm writing.
And it does feel like you're having fun. I mean, there are moments in the novel where the sort of narrator comes back in and sort of, discloses that he knows when a character is going to die, for example, 20 years in the future, and you can just, it feels like a kind of burst of energy in the text.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, is like in terms of in those terms, yeah, it also allows me a lot of freedom to do stuff that I didn't, haven't allowed myself to do previously. Like, cause I've usually in my novels, I've only stuck to first person. And is a very intense sort of first person that's actually about kind of where it's limited, how those limits like cause that first person narrator to be kind of blinkered and come up with wild theories about the world, or you know, their social circle. And here I was like, well, no, if I'm this is a third person novel, and yeah, and this will permit me um, to to sort of step away. It'll keep something in control that I wasn't controlling before.
Yeah, that's interesting. I one of the pleasures of reading this novel for me is also the way it kind of holds a mirror, or maybe a kind of funhouse mirror that distorts things a little bit to, well, a lot, to American culture and to American politics. And I found myself really interested in the moments where certain kind of political tendencies are exaggerated for comic effect, so some healthy satire. I'm thinking of the example in Politics and the Chicagoan Language where a woman is fired from the mayor's office for calling the disaster what it is, a sinkhole.
Yeah.
And there are other scenes where kind of campus politics are lampooned a bit, this need to sort of control language carefully. And I guess I'm wondering how you kind of think about the possibilities, or maybe even the role of fiction in that sort of political space. I'm thinking maybe something like Philip Roth, The Human Stain, and maybe maybe a kind of more to get a little more concrete. I'm interested in the chapter heading of the introduction, Carrying Pictures of Chairman Mao. I'm assuming it's a reference to the Beatles song, and I wonder what maybe you could talk about your reasons for choosing that.
The reason for the Carrying Pictures of Chairman Mao was when I started that. As I think I mentioned this in your class, I was a bit bitter at that moment because I was having trouble selling the previous novel, which I ended up selling. It ended up working out, and I thought, well, there was a point I don't want to say crisis. I was pretty pissed off. I was in a state. I was playing a lot of video games. You know, I was like, you know, drinking a lot, like drinking and gaming, you know, as they do. And I think that so I was trying to think about all the stuff that I don't do as a fiction writer that I know one can do as a fiction writer to get their book, you know, pushed and, you know, sold, and then I was like, I actually couldn't actually even do that shit. Like I couldn't you know, there's some writers, there's some like, you know, literary writers that'll be like, I should just write crime fiction and, you know, whatever. It's like, dude, you can't do that. Like, you know, you write about a sad guy in a room. Like, you do that really well. Like, you're not gonna write a good mystery. And like, and all, and I'm the same way about myself. And so, like, you know, the Carrying Pictures of Chairman Mao, like in the song, it's, you know, if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't gonna make it with anyone anyhow. And so I was like, yeah, like I don't even like this stuff. Like, I'm not, you know, it's not gonna work out. So shut up
Not
and
my
do
ideology.
the thing you want to do. Yeah, like yeah. Yeah, and as far as like the question about the kind of politics, so I don't think the Chairman Mao thing was really connected to, you know, certainly not connected to, you know, Maoism or anything. But in terms of how a novel, what I think my novels would do or should do politically, I'm like this sort of like, I don't even know if it's old school or what. Like I don't want my novels to be read politically. Like I know that's like in some circles it's like deeply un-okay to say that, or it's naive sounding, but I don't think most people read books politically. I think that most people who write about books read books politically. And I think that again, you take a story like The Balloon, and you can do tons of political things with it if you wanted to. You have this operable metaphor, but I don't think that's what Barthelme's after. I don't think reading the story, like honoring what it can do the most, actually kind of entails saying the political angle is sort of silly. So there are campus politics in here. There's all sorts of things that are getting made fun of, but I think, you know, separate from Roth, who I think had, and I love Roth, but I think, like you mentioned, Human Stain has a bit of an agenda. I think it's more complex than it's given credit for these days, because there's a lot of anger at Roth because his biographer was a scumbag. I don't follow that much, but I think that for me, like, any time that I'm like going to be skewering anything, it's like I think what I'm skewering is the desire to politicize rather than any particular politics. And maybe that's a politics. Like maybe I'm a nihilist. I don't know. But that's what I'm saying. Like this is a point when I'm like, I don't care. I just want to write a book and read one and have it be, you know, moving. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and there's also something really cathartic about being able to laugh at a
Hopefully.
kind of well, yeah, about at a moment that feels quite tense politically in the U.S. So
Yeah.
that was that was nice.
Glad to hear.
But I want to talk about birds now.
Yes, I love birds.
I found myself kind of looking midway through through this novel. I found myself looking a little too closely at a pigeon in Paris with a broken claw, and sort of getting inside of the pigeon's head and thinking back to the day that the accident happened, and would the pigeon ever recover enough to stand? And I thought, okay, this is definitely Mount Chicago working its way into my perception. And some of the most enjoyable parts of the book are written in the perspective of Gladman's parrot Gogol, and I want to know what you did to capture that non-human perspective. How did you find Gogol's voice? What were some of the things you did to achieve that?
I mean, well, so I do have a parrot named Gogol, and I've thought about him a lot for a long time, because he's my parrot, and I don't have children, and I don't plan to. And I think so I think whatever, if there's any like little bit of parental desire or something, it probably, that part of the brain that's getting spent on thinking about a kid and its development, and I imagine I've never had one, like, but you watch a parrot, and a parrot like is obviously this intelligent creature that has thoughts and feelings, and they're not in words, of course, even though they use words. And so thinking about that bird that much for that long a period of time, I think made me interested in writing about him. And I think the way that I approached it was mostly like I just thought about animal portrayals that I was aware of in fiction and cartoons and stuff, and I was like, I don't want to do it like that, and so because you want to do a new thing, and so I was like, what is not like that? And basically, I wanted Gogol to be kind of a bastard, like, and like not like a full. I wanted Gogol to be complicated, which I think my bird is. My bird is mean. My bird mistreats my wife. Like, my wife has known my bird and been in its presence more than any other human except for me, and will like just attack her just for the hell of it.
Jealousy.
Like just like, and it hurts. Like it's not, it's like it's a small animal, sharp beak. It can be scary, and I'm like, how can it do that? So I thought a lot about that, and yeah, I feel like there's something I could talk endlessly about Gogol. It's embarrassing. It's like but I think about Gogol a lot. The one thing that I think is kind of, I don't want to blow anything in the book, but there's an event. There's an event that happens in the book that's very bizarre with Gogol. It's very bizarre, and right before the book came out, which is to say like 2-3 years after I finished writing the scene in which this bizarre thing happens, the bizarre thing happened in real life, and that was very strange. So I'll stop saying because you guys don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. But yeah, but those
I enjoyed it. It's really satisfying to me to know that the
really
bizarre
crazy
thing that happens to Gogol.
Yeah, I'll show you photos.
Oh, wow.
I was
can't
sent
wait.
photos. Yeah, it was very strange. Yeah.
Good, yeah. I think it's always it's really tricky, I think, with the animal perspective, because I think there's the tendency to anthropomorphize, and you can't get away with it because you're working in language.
Yeah.
But I did feel that there were scenes narrated from Gladman's perspective, or just occurrences that happen between Gladman and the bird, and then you get it from the bird's perspective, and you start to kind of see how the event looks through both sets of eyes.
Well, it's interesting you use that term. Like there was the anthropomorphize. Like I find that there was a quote. I think it was I'm gonna screw it up, but I think it was B.F. Skinner, who I love. I'm a behaviorist. He went, I think, to Columbia University, and he gave a lecture. And there's a guy at Columbia that I guess he recently died. He was famous for being a wise ass at lectures. He was another professor, and at the end of Skinner's lecture, Skinner took questions, and the guy's question was, so basically you're saying we're anthropomorphizing humans, which I thought was which is yeah, like, and I think so I didn't sweat the anthropomorphization thing, because I actually do look at Gogol and I'm like, you're a full creature.
Yeah.
Not to be all like hippy dippy about it. I'm a bastard. I'm not a nice person, but like
But you love your parrot.
I love my parrot more than most people. Like it's so yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Great. I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning about not having people close to you who've died, and I want to think about that kind of through the character of Gladman, because I admit that up until about maybe 3/4 of the way through the book, I was looking at the disaster that happens, the terrestrial anomaly, as it's called in the book, as something of a plot device in the best way, right? It's something that's so tragic and so forceful that our attention is there. Kind of Gladman is in his room, sort of sedated on Xanax and whiskey, mourning the loss of everyone he loves, and you're so, as a reader, I was so worried about Gladman that I could follow hundreds of pages of descriptions of other characters and still keep that in my head as something I cared about and would come back to. But when I got to, and I'm not going to give anything away, don't worry, but when I got to Gladman's comedy act, I realized that this disaster is absolutely necessary to the work the book is doing, and it's the way that it's digging at something that has to do with grief and resilience. And I wondered if you could speak maybe a little more about Gladman's character. He describes himself as lucky and that he hasn't had a brush with death, and he's the kind of guy that enjoys turbulence on planes. And I wonder, is there something about his insulation from death, because he's lucky, because he's relatively young, kind of just getting to middle age, and or maybe is something about American culture that kind of insulates us against death? Is there something that makes him particularly ill-equipped to handle this kind of catastrophe that would devastate anyone, but maybe particularly Gladman?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's a cool question. I'm gonna try to answer that without rewriting the book. I think that a lot of it is like, if I think of Gladman as as a real person rather than a character, it's that he's this sort of like, he's the happy guy, and he's the lucky guy, right? He does recognize himself as lucky. He's optimistic. He enjoys everyday things in a bigger way than some people who are tuned a bit different do, and he's really had nothing bad happen to him. And I think that I think that what insulates him is pretty much that, and a long period of that. Sort of like I was saying about myself. It's a long time to live without losing anything major. Just even not losing, let alone Gladman has some success. And I think that at the same time, in the book, when there's the bit about turbulence, it's like his wife is frightened terribly about planes, and it's not even real to him that he can die. And this is the thing. And again, Gladman is a novelist and a comedian, right? And so it's very strange for anyone with any brain who does either of those things to recognize that death is real and actually not believe it. That's a really strange. And I do think that most people, no matter what level of loss they have, most people, not all people, do walk around with this huge contradiction. I don't think that. I don't think it's controversial. I think it's you walk around, you're gonna die, but you don't fucking know you're gonna die. I think most people. I think some people really do, and I've met a couple, and they're different. And no, they are. There's a different thing. But even people who have been through a lot, you meet people who have been through terrible wars, and they're walking around and they don't. It's not like they forgot. It's not like they didn't suffer. They didn't have a trauma. But there's some weird thing that pushes that away. And I don't know. So I think it's some version of that. But he didn't go through a war. There was nothing that he didn't even have to actually forget. So I think there is a thing, and there's sort of earlier in the book, in the introduction, there's some twinning of Gladman with the narrator Adam Levin, who really isn't me, and there's this conversation about being the sort of ultimate solipsist conversation, where that maybe one is God. One has no sense that anyone else. One has no proof that anyone else actually thinks, and so maybe one is God. This is LSD type thing, and that maybe what goes along with that, if you think you're God, you can't think you die, right? And there is some, I don't know. I'm babbling at this point, or that's why I write it down, because otherwise I just go on.
Yeah, I think that feeling of invincibility,
That's the word.
it's yeah, or immortality. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the next thing I wanted to ask you is really connected to this, but it has to do. Maybe it comes at it maybe from a different angle. It has to do with the role of kind of Jewish identity and especially Jewish comedy in the book. As you mentioned, Gladman is a stand-up comedian and a novelist, and Absurdist, the other kind of main character in the book, it certainly plays a lot of his kind of Jewish childhood for laughs. And one of the gags in the book is a recording that Absurdist makes of the mayor of Chicago, kind of saying what he wants to make he's talking about how he'll make the kind of the memorial to the disaster of Mount Chicago, and he'll say, I want it to be like Auschwitz, but a less depressing Auschwitz.
Less depressing Auschwitz.
So,
yeah.
so Abdur records this, sends it to his love interest Sylvie Klein. She finds it hilarious. He eventually shows it to Gladman. Gladman finds it hilarious. And I think what I'm getting at here is I wonder. Is there in Jewish culture or in Jewish tradition a certain way of kind of laughing one's way through trauma and tragedy? Is there some kind of repository that you're tapping into? What is this connection? Is there a connection? And if so, what is it?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a strictly Jewish thing. I think there is. I mean, in obviously the Auschwitz example is, and this stuff. It all looks a little different after October 7th.
Yeah.
To me, even, but I do think that I think that what I've always found, at least the way I was raised, and again, I'm Gen X. I was, like, there's a certain kind of like peace that was coming over the world for a minute, or seeming peace in America. Everything was chill, everything was getting better, and everything sucked in this monoculture way that you could hate very easily and just like make your new, whatever, Gen X, and I think that one of the things that when I was a little kid, I would have gotten in a fight over, which would be like a Jew joke or something. Like, it became a thing where I was like, I have to figure out the most anti-Semitic joke I can make. Like, this is like, this is the point of being alive, is to like undermine every kind of, category. And I think that Apter's a little bit more of that point of view in Sylvie, and that's maybe why they laugh at the mayor's saying like earnestly that he wants to make a less depressing Auschwitz, which is, which again, like, is anti-Semitic in the sense of the term today, when like everything is anti-something because it's insensitive or something. It's insensitive maybe, but like but it would actually be a pretty funny thing for a Jewish person to say. And so it's like, I mean, that's why I wrote it. I thought it was funny. I thought the idea of like of even wanting that is so horrible that it's hilarious. Like, but maybe I have a weird sense of humor. I'm not sure. I don't think I know enough about. I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for like Jewish culture at large, and I don't think I know enough. I think I'm a weirdo, and like I don't know how to answer that otherwise, other than to say that I think a bunch of people I was friends with, Jews and not Jews, would have found that really, really funny around 1996. And it's a different kind of funny probably in 2020, and it's maybe a lot less funny today, and maybe it'll be a lot more funny in a year or something.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and like that's
okay.
interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because when it's not funny, what is it? It's like, whoa, that's fucked up. And
Yeah.
I like that too.
Yeah.
So, I don't.
But I think there's a sense in which I think it does feel like there are certain things that are just that are tragic, that are traumatic, and there's a kind of like halo of sanctity around them, and maybe just sort of being able to break that halo, and you have to do it carefully, and you have to be sort of you have to have a certain relationship to the kind of trauma in order to make that joke. But it's I think still like the ability to make the joke feels like there's some kind of way of like processing or moving through or something.
Oh, maybe so. Yeah, I mean, like, and it's certainly like in that sense. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Like, and I think a lot of the stuff is like, I've grown closer with my parents as I've gotten older. I think a lot of people do, and like, and so it was like these are the kind of things they wouldn't have laughed at, that would have been too, sanctified or whatever. I don't know, and now I think they actually think that shit's funny when I say it. Like so it's like so I think there's something that has to do with time, and there's something that also has to do with this whether a thing is when a thing becomes inbound, inside bounds, and when it's out of bounds is interesting to me. And I feel like it's for a thing to be, it's like sort of peak funny for whatever I know about comedy, which isn't a ton, granted. It's you want it to be just out of bounds. Like it's like just out of bounds, like enough that you can go, wow, that shouldn't be funny, and yet I'm laughing. Like you don't want it to be so far out.
Especially in stand-up comedy, right? It's always that limit, and you kind of see that. You sometimes see those stand-up comics that kind of cross the line, and you're like, oh.
But like the too soon thing. I mean, although I never think too soon. I think like too soon is always. I like too soon. Because once you say once I think it's Gilbert Gottfried who did the big too soon, and it was a 9/11 joke on 9/13 or something. I don't know when it was, and no one laughed, and that was his punchline. Too soon, and I think after that, now then there's a competition to be too soon. Like how can you get sooner? I don't know, but yeah. So.
Well, I have a couple more questions. I know that we want to open up to the audience, but I also want to give them a chance to hear you read, if that's something, that, and maybe that reading might match up. Maybe a 5-minute reading might match up with the final question from me, and then we can open it up.
Cool. All right. So you want to read? You want me to ask you? You want to ask a final question? You want me to read? You want me to ask you a question?
Sorry, that was unclear. It was a question. Do you want to read a 5-minute
sure.
passage?
I'll read. I have a thing I can read. So it's from early. And just tell me to shut up if I go over 5. I think I know it's 5, but I might not. Maybe I'll put I'll do what the fancy people do. I'll make a timer out of my communication device. Let's see here. Let's go 5 minutes, and I'm gonna stop at exactly 5 minutes. It's gonna beep, and if I'm mid-sentence, it's done. Okay. I'm going to read from this part that's pretty early in the book. It's from the mayor's point of view. I mentioned there's a number of point of views, and so this is after that disaster already happened. I'll just read it's the first time we're meeting the mayor, really. I'll go right from, this is our introduction to him. So the chapter is called Politics in the Chicagoan Language. If I end up doing like some kind of dumb daily type imitation voice, if you guys even know what that is, don't be bothered. It's automatic. All right, I'm hitting the start. All right. No one from the mayor's office ever said sinkhole, except for one gal just once over internet. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and loved ones of the victims of the sinkhole. By the end of the workday, that gal had been shit-canned. The mayor liked the gal too, liked the gal a lot. The gal didn't get it though, the problem with sinkhole. Or acted like she didn't. One or the other. Same difference in the end. She either really didn't get it, in which case incompetent, or played dumb when he explained to her, in which case, fuck you, because at least have the dignity. Sinkholes were for Florida. They made you think of swamps, and they made you think of armpits. Swampy armpits. Meth, opossums, thrush, and swamp ass. People in mourning did not need that. People trying to sympathize with people in mourning did not need that. Not in the least did the city of Chicago need that at all. And thereby, and therefore, gal shit-canned. You know how many hands he could count the regrets on? He could count the regrets on exactly no hands. For a week or so, they said the seismic event, which was sufficiently solemn and sciencey sounding, sure. Except then it began to seem too earthquakian for the mayor. Maybe only to him. Hard to know for certain. Epistemical roadblocks and so forth. But who hears seismic and doesn't think earthquake? The way the mayor saw it was that the way that people saw it was where once there was an earthquake, there will probably again be a whole nother earthquake, and probably sooner rather than later. People were negative. People needed hope. The city needed to heal, and then it needed to grow, always needed to grow, and it hadn't been an earthquake. Basically, what it had been was a sinkhole. So inaccuracy too. Then top it all off with, by the end of that week, the seismic event was already getting shortened to just the event. For a little while, the mayor thought, good, The mayor thought, you drop the seismic, you eventually lose the earthquakey overtones. But that was pie in the sky on the part of the mayor. That was a pipe dream the mayor was having. That thinking was wishful. It was wishful thinking. No one forgot what event was short for. They heard event with their ears, but in their brains, they were adding the seismic in front of it. And a seismic unsaid was, in a way, more affecting than a seismic unsilent. Like the one drop in all your best reggae music. A beat is missing. The drummer leaves it out, so you supply it yourself inside your brain. And that beat that wasn't there was made thereer than there. You danced to that beat that wasn't there. Unless for some reason you didn't like reggae, probably not you were racist, probably more like you were too shy to really let go enough to feel the primalistical islander rhythm, or too embarrassed to express the kind of feeling that rhythm made you feel and refused to dance at all. Reggae always made the mayor want to dance. The mayor's wife, too. She had a beautiful dance she would do to some reggae. Or another way to say it, he explained for those staffers who seemed like maybe they didn't dance to reggae, was that events sounded a step or three too deliberately removed. Sounded like they were trying to hide something. Like generals saying collateral damage for civilian casualties, for civilian deaths, for women and children blown to pieces by mistargeted missiles, for women and children blown to pieces by properly targeted missiles. You say civilian deaths or even civilian casualties, maybe you're a sensitive general who's trying to protect citizens from having to vividly picture women and children bleeding in pieces. But you say collateral damage, not only do you cause the citizens you're talking to think extra long about what you mean by collateral damage, which gets them to picture dead innocents more vividly and horribly than if you just said civilian deaths or civilian casualties, but you sound like a general trying to cover something up. To cover even his own ass, maybe, is the point. And we got nothing to cover up for here, the mayor at the meeting he'd called for the purpose of discussing the terminology continued to explain for the benefit of staffers who might not love One Drop the way he loved One Drop or might have gotten lost while he explained about the generals. We got nothing to cover up because the tragedy was not our fault, not by a long shot. And as much as citizens like to feel that their cities are being managed by government, that is also exactly just how much, if not even more than how much, they dislike to feel that they themselves are being managed by government. They hate it, understand? It insults their intelligence. I know this because I am first and foremost a citizen, and when someone tries to manage me, there stands my intelligence beside me, red-faced and clenching its fists and insulted, looking to me to set things right. And how do we set an insult right? By talking things through? By trying to change the insult's mind? No and no. There's no talking to insults. It's what makes them insulting. By vengeance is how we try to set insults right. And if we are civilized and not violent animals, that means going to the voting booth with vengeance in our hearts. Oh, done.
I'm so glad you read that bit about reggae. I love that. I remember that. So I've got my last question, and I'm going to try to be brief so we can open up and have lots of time for audience questions. But it's about the sort of the anecdote and the sort of controlled digression that make up a lot of this book. And I'm sort of thinking, on the one hand, Absurdist likes to tell his life in a series of 5 or 6 anecdotes, and the mayor will, this kind of wonderful mayor character who's got such a kind of voicey voice will count out things on using the fingers of his hand. And I guess I'm sort of thinking about this in relation to something Gladman says toward the end, like life is a shaggy dog story. So this kind of drawn out anecdote that holds the attention of a reader, but doesn't really end in any kind of meaning or punchline or conclusion or sort of satisfying pattern. And I'm wondering about the sort of usefulness of this kind of digression or anecdote, and its relationship to the sort of length of your work. What relationship is there to what I found as a pretty emotionally affecting climax or sort of endpoint? How are these two things working together in your writing?
Well, I think I mean I don't want to speak for the other couple books because I think they operate differently.
In this book, sorry.
This is and the other two are actually longer than this. But like this one, I think that actually it's that trying to make that shaggy dog thing actually operate a bit differently was one of the, as I was getting toward the end, I was like, what I want to pull off is to have this thing that does feel like that has a climax, but the climax nonetheless, it can, from a different point of view, you've just told a Shaggy Dog story. Like I don't know. I think I don't. If that makes any sense, it's you know, again, it sounds stunty, but I don't mean it's stunty. It's like I think I came by it honestly. Like it seemed like this was the move. Like when I was getting toward the move. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, we can quibble about it because I feel like that the ending's pretty strong, but I think we better stop here before we give anything away. But
All right. Well, thank you.
Can we
for
have a
those
big round of
questions.
applause?
Thanks.
If you want to know what happens next, obviously you have to purchase the book after this event. But before we move to the book signing and purchasing, we have time for some audience questions. So we'll start with our in-person audience, and if we have time, Zoom audience, feel free to start sending in your questions over the chat now. So, in-person room, I turn to you. Don't be shy. Someone always has to go first. Be brave. We need to play like the Jeopardy theme song or something here as we wait for this.
Maybe I tell them the answers and
Yeah,
they
just,
ask the question.
yeah. And then we have to guess the questions. Perfect.
Fine.
While the questions percolate, yes? Someone raising their hand? Yes, fabulous. We'll take it.
So I've been, hi,
Hi, Bob.
following you for a long time. I haven't read this one yet, but you made me want to. And, you know, one thing about your writing is that it's very, very dense in an interesting way. It's loaded, you heard it in this excerpt, with references and meta-references and winks and nudges that maybe somebody only from Chicago would get, like the reference to the Daily Voice. And there's not extra. It's not overpacked. So I'm imagining your editing process and how difficult it is to tear away the extra bits of skin that you think don't need to be there and shrug off all the dandruff to get it to that point where it reads like you just read it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think it's not actually that it's pretty straightforward for me because I delete almost everything I write. So it's like if there's a doubt that it's working, and I do it in the moment too. It's like I probably write 1,000 words a day and keep 10, like and so it's like, yeah, it doesn't land. You fuck it, go forward. Like or it doesn't land. You have to figure out how to make it land, and so start the sentence over. So that's how it's like. In the end, like with all the books, like it was like they all had various editing processes, like at the end, but in the moment of writing it, I don't really go forward unless I'm satisfied with what I have. So it's like I don't like sit with like sweaty armpits and I'm like, oh, this is brilliant, you had to keep going. It's like I'm really, really slow. So I think if I'm glad to hear that it kind of works or sort of does. Thank you. That was nice. Does that answer the question? I think. No. All right. It doesn't hurt. I enjoy. I think the part of it is like I'm supposed to be like, oh, it's such suffering, but I really enjoy that. I love throwing shit away. Like it's a very liberating feeling. It's really. Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know, but you can hate your own so freely. Someone else, you got to worry about how to explain to them that they did something shitty. Like yourself, you just be like, no, this is terrible, man. Just ditch it. Yeah, there you go.
If I can add on to that question, was there anything that was originally in Mount Chicago that you sliced out that was particularly satisfying to get rid of?
I mean, anything I got rid of was pretty satisfying, except for one thing that was unsatisfying, which was like I had this like very, very kind of like long part that was about this bar called the Rainbow, which in the bar like does appear in the book, but the Rainbow is just like this amazing history. And it's this legendary place. It's great. It's staffed by like members of ex-punk rock bands from Chicago that are like just awesome bands, like and Simone de Beauvoir used to get drunk there with Nelson Algren, and they get in a fight and get kicked out and go to the bar up the street. It's a fucking great place, and it's like a killer bar. It's the cheapest bar you can find in Chicago. the bar used to be a stage. Like at one point, they had burlesque there, and you hear. Some stuff is rumors. Half the bars in Chicago, people that look older than like 1975. Like people say that it was it was a speakeasy that was owned by Capone. And I don't think that was true about the Rainbow. Maybe it was. Bob would actually know. But the Rainbow's this glorious place that lives huge in my mind. And I had this really long section that I wrote that I was actually happy with, but it, like in itself, but it screwed up the rhythm. And so I cut it, and it was probably like 40, 50 pages, and I was like, I spent months on it. I was like, and I thought I had this really nailed down, and then I was like, it can't be in there. It's screwed. It's way too much of a digression. It was, yeah. So.
Other questions in the room? I'm gonna go monitor the Zoom chat. Amanda, I'm tossing it to you if you have a last question to ask.
Sure. You're a Chicagoan writer, and I'm sure people ask you a lot about Chicago. I want to ask you about Paris, maybe.
Sure.
Just
yeah.
because we're
Paris
here.
is a lot in the book.
Yeah, and
there's a lot of Paris in the book,
I wondered sort of both about how the kind of scenes, the flashback scenes you write in Paris, and also perhaps the characters, the French characters, the wife of Gladman, Daphne, and her family. I wondered, and also kind of the marriage is sort of wonderfully depicted with all these kind of cultural misunderstandings that are then worked out. Like there's a time when she doesn't get a joke because hasn't seen The Sopranos,
Right.
and so that has to get explained. And I wondered if just working on sort of a different setting, a different kind of set of characters, whether that did it make you think differently, or did it give you any kind of purchase on writing about Chicago, writing about home, writing about the U.S.?
I mean, I think certainly I'm married a Parisian woman, and so I've spent a lot of time in Paris, and I had before I started writing the book spent kind of a lot of time in Paris, and nonetheless managed to learn not like a lick of French, but having spent time here, and I think you and I discussed this earlier, like I think this is this amazing city, and I think that it made me spending time here makes you sort of reflect on where you're from, as being anywhere does. And one of the things that was here that I really liked was there's a way, it seems to me, to be sort of among different generations at the same time, like in the same places, that isn't weird. And in Chicago it is. You don't, like, you take a place like the Rainbow that I just mentioned, it's a certain age group, and and I'm aging out of it, frankly. And like it's like, but that's a thing. It's like you don't go to a cafe and see a couple old guys or an older couple sitting there talking to each other in Chicago. And here you see it kind of a lot. Like, and you see older folks at a bar, and you see older folks at the bar with sometimes much younger people, and they're not giving each other weird eyes. They're not uncomfortable. And in Chicago, they certainly are. I think it's all across the U.S. I mean, the cities in the U.S. that I have any familiarity with, that's how they are. You don't, and I think that has something to do too with this thing about how it's like also your relationship to your family seems to be different here than it does in the U.S. Or at least, again, this definitely is generationally different. Like between certainly Gen X and sort of younger people now, where like I wanted to get out of my parents' house, and I'm a fan of my parents, but I wanted to get out of there when I was 12, and that wasn't weird. Like everyone did. It was like, you are over me, man. Like, stop with the fucking authority. And here there seems to be like, and again, this might be idiosyncratic. It might be just because my wife's family and the few other families that I've interacted with, but it seems like they got shit worked out a little better, a little more like understanding of how space should be handled. And there's a little more freedom here. There's a little less fear of your kid getting killed or something. And I think in some cases for good reason. And I don't know. So I think, again, that because you grow up someplace and you think about it a lot and you go, this must be pretty much how the world is. And it's pretty much is not entirely. Yeah. And you see how much not entirely it is the more time you spend here. So
yeah, because it's just interesting to me, because when I think of this as a very American novel, and yet there are these scenes there are these really kind of gripping scenes in Paris and sort of.
Yeah.
We have a final question
Sure.
from Zoom. Jacob Leitz is writing from Iowa City. Jacob has sent in a brilliant and very long question, which I will condense in the interest of time. So thank you, Jacob, and I apologize for my editing. Jacob writes, Adam, you open up that introduction to the novel by telling the reader they're going to read a series of lies, which results in a larger story by the end of said series of lies. The novel itself is full of characters telling each other lies and stories as well. So, my being Jacob, Jacob's question is, what do you believe happens to us when we tell each other lies? And did you have a goal in mind about what stories can mean while you were writing Mount Chicago?
Wow, man. All right. When we tell each other lies, what can happen to us? So I think that in a social situation, I don't know if this is going to answer the question directly or not. I get really bothered by people who don't try to make me laugh. Like, I feel like it's, and bothered is maybe too strong a word, but I want, like, there's people you can have intense conversations with that aren't particularly funny, but even that gets old, like, pretty quick. The people that I'm closest with, like friends, family members, my wife, these are people that crack me the fuck up. And that our fundamental way of interacting is that we're supposed to be making each other laugh. And that's usually by making shit up. Like, it's not lies. I'm talking to you like you're Jacob.
I am Jacob now.
It's not lies in the way that fiction is, where fiction, you can go across, bounds, but it's like, I'll say ridiculous things to my friends and they will to me just to, make me laugh, things that just aren't true. I can't, of course, think of any right now, but you're sitting in a room, you're having a minor feeling about something, you're going to pretend you're really angry about something you're not angry about at all, you're going to make fun of someone across the room for no good reason because it's funny, you'll make up some lie about them, like whatever. So I think I like lies in that respect. I like lies that everyone knows are lies. And I think that what's nice about that, apart from the fact that I really enjoy laughing and prefer it, is I think that it's, in a way, it's kind of more honest, not to be all like, isn't it ironic? But it's sort of more honest if we just sit there and go, yeah, we're going to just lie to each other. It's fun, than to pretend like we're not doing that, a lot of the time. Yes. I agree. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Of course. Yep. Right. Yes. Yep. I hear you. No, I agree. I agree. But
Just
yeah,
quickly
that's
for our Zoom audience who can't hear without microphones, we're talking about stand-up comedy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we should do it after the thing. But I think yes. Yes.
Can we have a final
Amen.
round of applause, please?